Hello folks, this is Ben. Today I'm going to be talking about anger. So working with repressed anger and ways to get in touch and fully embody that anger, because it's something that a lot of people struggle with. They feel very hesitant about moving towards their anger, embodying it, feeling that energy go through their body. But it's a really important topic because anger is such a powerful emotion that when it's repressed, when it's huge amounts of it are stored in the body, it causes all sorts of psychological issues, emotional issues, and many physical issues as well, issues of physical health. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit about my experience, my journey with anger, then talking about how to get in touch with it, so working with repression, then give you a few ideas for how to actually embody it, so some like physical practices you do, because working with anger it's something you need to build. It's a skill you need to build if you really want to sort of get in touch with it inside yourself. And then in the end I'll talk very briefly, me and Angela McLeod are doing a live workshop soon on how to use the body, postures, gestures and so on to fully embody emotions. So there'll be information about that at the end in the description. So my story with anger, very briefly, I came to somatic work through alcohol addiction, and I've discovered that repressed anger was one of the main drivers, if not the main driver, of my addiction. And also I used to have a lot of skin issues, and I still do to varying extents, but for different reasons. And I found that repressed anger was also related a lot to that. And that was like, those combined was like the root of my sort of suffering that brought me to, somatic work and spirituality. It was being an alcoholic, but also my skin I would get so many horrible rashes, like hundreds of green, when I was a bit younger, hundreds of green pustules on my back, and like sometimes I had to moisturize like 20 times a day. It was just very unpleasant. The combination of like hangovers and like burning skin was just seriously not fun. So I'm so glad to have found the solution for it. Which is getting in touch with the anger. So let's get right to it. We don't really feel comfortable with it. We are taught, society teaches us, parents teach us, anger is bad, you're not supposed to express it. And at the same time, life has so many opportunities. We live in such a controlled society as well, in many ways. There's so much anger that wants to come up and be expressed, and it can only get pushed down. And I'm going to get right into some ways my experience. Actually, sorry, I should clarify my story a little more. How did I work with it? Well, I started doing the somatic work, and then the anger started coming up. I had no idea it was there as I just started going through the layers. So I started, there's sort of the layer of numbness and dissociation at the top. Then I found, as I didn't realize there was all this stuff below the surface. I slowly got through that protective layer. Then there was a load of sadness, like a layer of sadness. Just a lot of hurt and tears. And then underneath that, I started being able to get into the real anger and hatred that was within. And then I'm talking about this very, very generally. It didn't quite go in these fixed layers, but that's sort of a rough idea. And I was really surprised when I started breaking through to this anger. And I've spent so many hours of my life now. It's been like 50 hours of trying to embody it and let this energy integrate in various ways, because there's this mountains of it, right? It was like every day I'd been at school or at university or at work, every day I hadn't wanted to be there, and there were all these people around me that I didn't want to be with, and I couldn't express any of that. I knew I was full of so much fear that I just had to sit there. So you would just sit there, the whole body wants to just explode, and I had to push it down. So you'd be amazed at what you find down there in terms of repressed anger. Like, it's astonishing. And it's also one of the most transformative things, because anger is so powerful. It just has an incredible unconscious effect in your life if you're unable to tap into it in a healthy way and integrate much of that repressed anger. And I sort of experimented with different ways. I did a lot of sessions and practice sessions with people, figuring out the best ways slowly over time of integrating it and getting in touch with it. And as I started really feeling into that anger, that's when my addictions just fell off a cliff, basically. although I'd stopped drinking like 5 or 6 years ago, I was still binging chocolate every day and tons of coffee and things like that. And I just noticed that the chocolate just started falling away by itself. There just wasn't that desire to eat it anymore. And the skin massively improved as well. Because obviously if you're in a sort of chronic fight response, you know, very deep down in the body, of course that's going to affect, you know, some areas of your physical health. And it felt like there were these fires going out of my body. Like so much, there was so much relief that I hadn't known, I realized I needed. So how do you actually start to get in touch with it? You may need to work through some of those layers, those protective layers I mentioned at the beginning. So there might be a bit of work working with sort of dissociation and numbness up front, which I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But that might be a first step. Then see if you can simply invite in some of that anger. You know, I'm sure you can think of a person who in your life you have unexpressed anger towards. Just bring them up in your mind's eye and see if you can start to simply invite in that anger. It's it can be an emotion that's also very, very readily available, paradoxically. But you can sort of get a whiff of it, but then as soon as you start to move into it, it like the nervous system clamps down, that survival response, like no, we can't express this. And so this is where you need to build the skill of slowly working with that response that wants to clamp down on the anger. And I've found that it's helpful to firstly stand up. You want to be standing, because if you're sitting down in a chair, that's automatically kind of a shut down position. That sort of position lends itself to more shut down, sort of downward moving emotions. If you stand up, that lends itself to anger and those upward moving emotions. And then you want to attempt to move into the anger and pay loads of attention to that moment when the system starts clamping down. And then move into that part. See if you can notice and allow that part that's sort of clamping down. I find it, if you just sit with it, again, it can sort of get a little stagnant. I find just putting a hand on the chest, say if the chest is clamping down, putting a hand on the chest and bringing some movement, just breathing into that part that's afraid of expressing the anger. And you can just stay with it. You'd be amazed at how effective just a little bit of movement is, actually, just because it's kind of a freeze response, so it kind of wants to thaw and loosen up. So just bringing a bit of love in the form of that breath, touch and movement can be really helpful. You can, of course, also go a little deeper into the fears and sort of inquire as to, well, what's the worst that would happen if I would fully express my rage to this person? And you'll probably get some more, more fears coming up in the forms of, images and words and feelings. And it's a question of slowly allowing those, moving into the fear, letting the fear be afraid. And then you sort of go back and forth. You want to sort of invite in the anger, and as you feel something clamping down, move into it, allow it, find out what's behind it, allow that. Then, as that begins to thaw, you can then see if you can move back into the anger. And by going sort of backwards and forwards, you sort of get into a bit of a rhythm, and your body sort of slowly learns that gets a little more comfortable with feeling anger. And so do you, because a big part of this as well is just feeling uncomfortable. Like you feel self-conscious, and like people will hear you in the next room or whatever. And that's another response you can work with, and you feel that sense of someone who's going to hear you. You can sort of feel that tension. It's just a question of gently allowing that tension, being really kind and loving with it, allowing it to soften, and then seeing if you can move back into the anger. So that's a super brief set of ideas for how you might start to get in touch with it. And once the anger starts to flow a little more, you want to start to move as the anger and express from the anger. So you might start to sort of get in touch with just by clenching your fists, breathing more aggressively. Fuck you. So speak from that place. Don't describe it and be like, oh, this part kind of wants to say fuck you. So see if it's okay and safe to fuck you. to really start speaking from that anger, as if you were that anger, like merging with it. And then you can, and I did at the beginning, kind of explode, you know, just like at the beginning I was like thrashing around the room, just like kicking and punching the air and going crazy and like shaking my arms and all sorts. And I don't think either me or anyone who was facilitating me really knew quite what to do with that, or if it was helpful or not. I think it was helpful to like know that was an option, that was part of my emotional range. I've slowly learned that there's probably slightly wiser ways of going about it, although you have to experiment for yourself, you know, it's ultimately up to you. What I do find helpful is really expressing and moving with and as that energy, but in a slightly more mindful way, so a slightly more purposeful way, you could call it. So like if you want to punch pillows, do so, but like really feel the energy of the anger as you sort of very purposefully and mindfully just like punch that pillow. I'm imagining there's a pillow floating midair just so the camera can see it. But if assuming, you know, you don't have any floating pillows, you know, you can punch one that's on the ground. That's also a viable option. Just like really feeling each one if you were to punch it, or stamping on the ground, you know, stamping, but really feeling each one. And sort of feeling that energy move through. And then you want to pause frequently as well to just reground yourself. And also I find that whenever you pause, or after each wave of the anger going through, there's like a lot of residual energy in the body. So just pausing, that's a really good opportunity to like integrate that. Basically, you can sort of feel tons of energy swirling around, and you can just stay there and just feel into it, and you'll feel it sort of go in waves. And then see if you can move back into the anger. And of course, again, if you feel any part freezing up again, you want to sort of just move with it a bit more gently. Another couple of tips is, you know, there are certain movements that work very well, like punching stuff, sort of screaming. If there's people around you, I do a kind of a faux scream, like a just really using the breath and the voice and sounds, like ooh, zzz, that kind of stuff, to, you know, stuff that vibrates the body, you know, those kind of sounds, like it's sort of, you can feel the vibration. Another good one is to press against something. You can either imagine yourself like pressing against sort of an imaginary wall. So imagine there's some huge resistance pushing against you, and you're just like pushing all that energy through against this resistance. Or you can use a wall. Do that. You ground yourself on the feel yourself really grounded on the floor. The floor's like, I hope you can hear me now. You ground your feet on the floor, and then you want to press against the wall. Again, just being really purposeful and mindful about pushing the energy through the wall. Hope you enjoyed that visceral demonstration. And you can, you know, combine words and sounds in with any of these. And it's just a case of staying really purposeful, present, grounded, and taking those pauses to just check out what's going on in the system. And then you want to almost practice this pretty frequently. And you'll notice that as you start working with it more and more, it'll start coming up voluntarily. So you'll be going about your day and you'll just feel like that energy start to rise in your system. And this can be quite inconvenient at times, I have to admit, but it's a very good sign that, you know, the nervous system is starting to open up, and that it's getting more comfortable. It's like, oh, finally we can start to let go of some of this stuff. Thank God for that, you know. So it's taken every opportunity. And in that case, if you can even spend 5 minutes going to the bathroom and just like, I don't know, do some anger work. These are great opportunities because it's such a different life on the other side of like integrating a lot of that anger. In my case, at least, you know, it was transformational for my addictions and skin health, and also it's so helpful for things like setting boundaries, because if you have no access to that anger, you actually become a very anxious person, because if you can't access that energy, then you can't set boundaries, you can't say no to people. And that makes you very afraid of other people. So you become very anxious naturally because you know that you can't say no. And so you become afraid of all these situations where you might have to say no, and all these people to whom you might have to say no. And that's just a downward spiral that you don't really want to get in, and one that I'm very familiar with. That's why repressed anger and anxiety are very related. So, Angela McLeod, we've been practicing these different things with our clients, on each other as well, of different ways in sessions to help people embody anger, because as I said, a lot of people do somatic work like sitting in a chair, and they kind of go, oh yeah, I feel a bit of anger, but you've got to get up and move and try to really get into that energy, and then find those parts that are holding back and then move with them as well. It's a very movement based thing in my experience, although there of course there's different things you can do for the various beliefs you might have around it as well. But this the workshop we'll be giving is more based on the kind of really getting in touch with movements and gestures and sounds and postures, and why that's so helpful to embody all kinds of emotions, to unravel trauma and sort of transform that stuck energy into livelihood and joy. So that's going to be 2 dates, March 26th and April 2nd. You can find all the info in the description. And yeah, any questions, just hit me up on Facebook or leave a comment. Peace out.